I think we need, oh, wow, voice of heaven. I think we need to just take a moment here to acknowledge this is one of the coolest things I have ever seen in my entire life. An art show with puppets, with Legos, with two masters. Let's give a round of applause for Jason Jasperson for bringing this thing together. What a show. This is a little bit different than the audience that we typically entertain at art lectures at Bethany. Either that or the freshmen are starting to look even younger than they have been lately. Clearly, there's a lot of engagement here from all walks of life, and when we look at what we've got in front of us here, we can really see why. Each of these pieces, so dynamic, so full of life and potential. There's something that connects here, I think, with all of us. I'm looking over at puppets right now, and they're masterpieces. It almost feels like there's just, it's an unusual art form where there's one thing missing. I can't think of another piece of art that needs to have the artist's active activity to make it look finished. When you're developing these things, do you have in mind like a personality, like where you're going with it and how it's going to come to life?
That's a good question that I get asked often. You know, I get asked the question, do you know what this is going to be, what he's going to sound like, what he's going to act like before you make it, or the puppet that is? And the answer is, well, kind of, but not really. I have an idea of what I want the puppet to look like, and puppets are not very dynamic people, meaning they're not complex. They don't have a lot of different parts of their personality. They're one singular. I can give you some examples from like the Muppets. Like Gonzo, he's just crazy, you know, so he's wild, and you can tell he's wild. The big curved nose, big buggy eye. Miss Piggy, she's the lady truck driver. That's kind of how Frank Oz describes her. And that's how she's meant to look. And so a lot of my puppets I designed to have one personality, and I keep that in mind when I build them, but I really don't have a voice or anything in mind until I put the puppet on and start to play around.
Would you mind showing us?
Yeah,
While he's getting set, I want to remind you guys that this forum, we take questions. So everybody, kids, college students, faculty, be thinking if there's something that you'd like to ask any of these guys, be ready to do so. We've got a microphone right over there up front, and I'll call for questions every now and then. Absolutely.
So this guy is Mo the monkey. And when I designed him, I was a student at the University of North Texas taking their television puppetry workshop. And we had a monkey pattern that we were going to follow, and I didn't really like it because it was that guy. That was the original monkey pattern. I said, it doesn't have enough character. It's kind of plain. So I said, I'm hitting my 40s. And so I thought, well, I'm starting to go bald. Maybe I'll make this guy kind of balding and middle-aged. And he was supposed to have a big pot belly too for some reason, but I didn't have enough time. We had a week to work on it. So I built Mo, and then once I got him on, I started playing around with what kind of guy would he be. And I thought, I'm kind of grumpy sometimes, so that's what I made Mo, kind of grumpy. And actually, what Mo is, connected with my personality, he is someone that just sets boundaries, and he won't move from them, and he's not afraid to tell you what he thinks about them. Okay, so that's Mo, and I thought, what kind of person do I know like that? So Mo, he has a Boston accent. And Mo says, hey, I'm a grease monkey. That means all day I work on cars. Then I come home, I take my tool belt off, and then I sit down in my chair and watch TV with the missus. Except for tonight, I'm here with you fine people. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know you are clapping for me and not for this guy. So that's kind of how I come up with characters. I play around with all of them like that.
So you didn't have that in mind right from that developed as you finished. He developed a personality as you worked on him.
He did indeed, yes. Yep. And the kind of intimidating thing is the guy who taught me how to build, the guy that I work for, his wife is from Boston.
Oh.
So.
That's fantastic. I can't believe how much that came to life when you were holding him. Like, there's a certain beauty to when they're sitting here and they're still, but as soon as it went onto your hand, the thing became a living creature.
You know, and that's actually kind of the key with making any of these puppets. Those of you who are artists, we talk about an aesthetic that you appreciate, right? So if you're painting, you have a certain goal of what you want your paintings to look like. I envision puppets that look a lot different than this. I want them to have a beauty and a certain form to them that I find appealing. And while I get close to it, I never quite nail it. And I think the reason why is when a puppet looks fantastic not on your hand, it lacks a certain life when you start to perform it because it's too stiff. So there are puppets out there that look fantastic. I don't know if any of you have seen Julie's Green Room on Netflix. Julie Andrews. Fantastic puppets built there. They're beautiful looking. But if you watch them perform, and these are master performers, the mouth is a little stiff. Can I say that out loud? I don't promise not to tell them. Yeah, but they're a little stiff, and that's the difference here. I try to make them as loose and as movable as possible, which takes a performer to bring it to life.
Absolutely. And now, Caleb, along the same lines, we were talking about how his kind of develop personalities as they go along, and that he goes in with a plan, but then maybe the life to the thing comes as the work is taking place. When I look at your work here, it is so movement focused despite being entirely still. I mentioned before, my favorite one is the Sept of Baelor. That's the temple-looking thing right up front here that's in the process of going through a green explosion. It looks so animated. How strong of a plan do you go in with, and then how much of it just sort of grows as you go?
So there's two different types of builds that I do. There are a lot of replica builds, and then there are builds that just happen. So the replica builds are pretty meticulously planned. I go off reference images and the like, the Sept of Baelor being an example from a show that none of you kids should watch. And then there are other builds, like Gateway to the Sea, which is the tall castle structure off here to my left, that started with a single word, I guess, which was a gatehouse. And it is not a gatehouse anymore. And that's what I love about Lego, is you start from the bottom and you build it up, and whatever happens as you build it up happens. And if there's something that doesn't turn out the way you want it to, there's an infinite flexibility to go back and fix it. And I have always strongly believed in incorporating some life into builds. And the chief ways to accomplish that are color. I learned that a lot on the show. The judges love their color. And like Brian was mentioning, implied movement can be really cool. So for the Sept of Baelor, for example, I have pieces caught midair as they're flying out from the structure. In some of the other buildings, it's minifigures populating the space, caught in the middle of doing everyday actions, walking around, jousting, whatever it might be.
Very cool. And I gotta say, on your Gateway to the Sea too, you know, when you think about a gatehouse, you're usually thinking about something kind of gray, maybe a little bit stark. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as you're trying to breathe life into a Lego creation? So
I must confess, I love gray because I've always been a castle builder. That's how many Lego builders get their start, because who doesn't love building castles? My brother and I, that's what we always built. Harry Potter was our big influence, but even the Hogwarts castle itself, you know, is a dark tan with like slightly greenish gray roofs. And so later in my building career, I think I challenged myself to incorporate as many colors as I can, because it brings a whole new dimension to some of these builds. With Gateway to the Sea again, I think my specific challenge with that one was to incorporate as many colors as I could into a single build, which is something like 50, pretty much most of the available Lego palette. But colors beyond gray pop so well. My favorite color is dark orange. There's a lot of dark orange and orange builds in this room. And that's what I love about Lego as a medium too. All of its colors are typically so vibrant and playful. And that conveys a certain mood with it. You know, it is clearly a toy. It is designed to be a toy, and I love the energy it brings to everything I make.
Can I ask him a question? Caleb, I have a question about your pieces. So when you sit down to build, do you sketch out your ideas? Like, do you sketch out a plan, like, this is what I'm going to tackle?
Kind of going back on what I said earlier, the ones that just kind of happen are really there is no plan. I can only think of one build that I meticulously planned, but then again, it was kind of based off an existing property, you know, a reference. But I love just having, like, maybe there's a single picture in my mind, but rarely do I sketch that out. And like, some people think that's crazy, and it totally is crazy. But it's liberating, you know, and it brings me back to when my brother and I were kids, you know, playing in the basement. It just, whatever happened, and it was a beautiful mess. It was lots of fun.
So from the first time you grab 2 bricks and snap them together, you know you're in for a ride.
Definitely. Okay. And like, there's some things that fail drastically. That is the downside of not planning. And most everything does not turn out to be that initial picture, that word I had. Yeah. Like, that is not a gatehouse. And a lot of these other things, like even the Sunshine Wagon, which is something my brother and I made actually based on our model from the show, you know. That's not the original vision we had in mind. It just happened. And that's kind of the beauty of the unfolding creativity and the creative process while building with a medium as flexible as the Lego brick.
Now, hang on a moment, because I think we need to talk about something. You brought up the Sunshine Wagon.
Oh, no.
Just by a quick show of hands, how many people are watching the Lego show right now? Yeah. All right. The Sunshine Wagon, for those of you who are uninitiated, has a notorious history. Do you want to tell us about what happened on the episode?
No, not particularly. The Sunshine Wagon, episode 6. It's the best episode. You should watch it. But it's hard to tell, even now, what exactly went so horribly wrong. But it began, I think, with too much adrenaline, not enough sleep, and maybe an overly inflated ego. And it was a recipe for disaster. More specifically, driving off a cliff, you know. And it was not an easy cliff to drive off of. It was a rather small opening in a demolition derby where I was supposed to hit cars, not the floor, but it hit the floor. And so, long story short, the Sunshine Wagon on the show met a terrible demise very early on in its life, but something about it resonated with a lot of people, and surely Jacob and myself. And so as soon as we were finished with our time on Lego Masters, we got home and went about building it because it's so orange and sunshiny. And
it's awesome! Well, and I gotta say, looking at it, there's a lot of your personality covering that. Cute animals and cages and a big ol' wrecking ball and a smiley face up on the top of a monster. Like, it's just absolutely, it definitely reflects your personality. Actually, Dustin had mentioned something about personality being reflected in the art that you do.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this guy represents sort of like a sliver of your personality. Is that something that you kind of go into all of these with, that you're going to that this is going to be some part of your id or ego or represent some part of who you are.
Boy, I'd like to hide and say that's not true at all, but I think if you're going to make a character come to life, you've got to find something in that character that you resonate with, even in the small part, and then just amplify it, make it huge. The three that I perform with the most are this guy right here, which is Eddie the Yeti, Mo, you were introduced to, and then that crazy spaced out penguin there looking at you right now with the wave. That was my first one. His name is obviously Little Dusty for some reason. But, like when you think about personality, Eddie, and this is kind of vulnerable, I'm kind of sharing you and taking away the curtain here, but Eddie is really kind of like a desire to please, like want to be liked. He's just so agreeable. And so when I first designed Eddie, I wanted him to be almost like Cookie Monstrous, where he's me name Eddie, me a monster, me a Yeti, but it just didn't fit, and I really didn't want to get sued either. So I kind of thought, well, who are probably the nicest, most agreeable people that I know of? And I started thinking of Midwestern, and having spent some time in the South, I know how people view Midwesterners as talking. So Eddie has very much the Yooper voice. So he's like, hey there, my name's Eddie, eh? And
I've got to see this. Is that okay?
That's
Can we watch
okay.
this? All right, fantastic. I'm tired of imagining.
it's okay. So Eddie is a bag puppet, which means you get your whole body kind of underneath his, which is very much like Sesame Street.
Sorry about destroying your stand there, Jason.
So Eddie's a bag puppet, and he's also a live hand puppet, which means my left hand operates his left hand, and so if you're going to have two hands instead of it just hanging here limp, you'd have another person come up behind you and slide their right hand in. So puppets like Eddie are a two-man job. In fact, if you become a professional puppeteer and you're on a set for the first time, I can almost guarantee you, if you're doing anything besides running props around, you're right-handing. Because it's just you just kind of stay out of the shot, and your job is to not be noticed. But so Eddie is very much the friendly Yooper, so he'll be like, hey there, my name's Eddie, and I'm a Yeti, and I like to climb stuff. And I'm just so kind that if you were stepping on my foot, if I had a foot, I'd say, hey there, when you get a chance, could you please, maybe get off my foot, eh? And I'm just kind of friendly like that because I want everybody to like me.
Fantastic. Fargo would have been so much better.
So you can see when you talk about is there my personality in it, you can see the difference between Mo, who's gruff and boundaried and doesn't care if you like him, and then Eddie, the desire to please everybody. And I think we've all kind of got that to some degree in us. So yeah, and as far as what makes puppetry awesome to me is they're like mirrors, puppets are. In this sense that puppets have no life, no emotions until you give it to them. And so when the performer performs with a puppet, if he taps into something that is truly human, meaning an emotion or an experience that is shared across humanity, we, as viewers, tend to put our own thoughts and emotions into it. And I'll give you an example. Jim Henson spent some time traveling around Europe, and this is after he kind of had done his early days Salmon and Friends type stuff. So he comes back to the States, and he's performing with this, I think it's a clown. It had almost like a handkerchief, and it had a little head on it. And it was a sad piece, it was sad music, and he's moving the puppet slowly, making it look like it's sad. And at the end of the piece, a person came up to him and said, how did you do that? And what do you mean? How did you make the puppet cry? And Jim Henson said, I never made the puppet cry. But that's all what the person put on that performance because he saw a bit of himself in that. And that's the amazing thing about puppetry is that, I was traveling up with my mother today, if she's out there, Mom, hi. And we were talking about things, and she said, who doesn't love a puppet? And I think that's kind of the thing. Who doesn't love a puppet? For that reason, that you get to put your emotions and your thoughts into that inanimate object.
I don't think we can even commune people who don't love puppets. There's something about that.
Not at my church.
Caleb, I see the same sort of, personality edgings coming through for you, like we were talking about with the Sunshine. Do you find that maybe there's something similar there, that your best builds start with a reflection of you?
Perhaps. I think of a lot of my work, and the way it turns out, we talked a lot about the color palette already, really depends on what I'm feeling, at the time. And it's hard to look at any of these and determine like some sliver of me or anything like that. But there's traces of that. There's traces of that in everything we do. Just because Lego is such a standalone medium, it's a little different. And I think that's what I really appreciate about the puppetry, that it's so lively. There's so much of you in it. That's really, really cool. And that's something maybe that Lego misses out a little bit on, just because you are bound by a prefixed mold in this case. And you can shape that to many different things, but at the end of the day, there is a limited spectrum of parts to choose from.
That's kind of funny, because my experience of Legos as a kid, I lived fairly close to my cousins, and they had this big, 32-gallon garbage bin full of Legos. So you go and they dump them out, and they would start grabbing stuff and building, and I would grab stuff and start to build, and I'd say, none of these shapes are the shape I want, and I can't make it be the shape I want, so I'm done with this. So the fact that you can make these shapes into what you want is absolutely amazing to me. The fact that you are able to be so free and loose with a medium that is so stiff and rigid. And you said you don't see a lot of yourself, but you think about it, it's different than this, but like you mentioned, the orange, your favorite color. There you are. And I bet if we started digging into your personality of like the characters, what they're doing on the bridge and that kind of stuff, I'm sure there's a lot of you in there. I mean, no?
Yeah, I totally think that's fair. No, I'm glad you brought that up. It's subtle. It's subtle. Yep. And I think my brother is really good at that, actually, putting his personality in things. Like he hit a lobster in the Sunshine Wagon. You'll have to find it later.
There's a lot hidden on the Sunshine Wagon.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I want to take a second, because I feel like, now we've been talking about you guys. We've been talking about younger audience members and maybe the interest that you would have in building Legos. And so I just want to ask, do any of the people under the age of 13 have any questions that they'd like to ask for either our puppeteer or our Lego master? Go ahead, buddy. The microphone's right over there. Go ahead. Oh, we got another one, though?
That's how I feel, too.
How did you remember how to build the, Sunshine Wagon?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. At the time we built it, the show had not yet aired or anything like that. But there was something very special about being in that space on Lego Masters, and it's really hard to compare that to anything else because it is unlike anything else. So there's a lot of memories that are really, really vivid, and there's things that I don't remember saying at all that somehow make the cut. And I think what most special thing about the show, of course, is building with my brother, the actual building process. And that's something that stuck with me long after, obviously stuck with my brother too. That is a collaborative build right there. And it was very energizing just to be back in the basement building with my brother again, because that's not something we had for many years, actually, before going on the show.
Besides you and your brother, had you ever been in a community like that where there's just a bunch of other Lego guys just loving to build Legos working together like that before the show?
Yes, actually. And that's what I love about the Lego community. There is an adult Lego community out there. It's a very tight-knit, crazy group of people. But it is, there's conventions all across the country, actually. And I was introduced to one of those probably back when I was like 13 years old. And that is a really cool place to be with all these people who share this unusual hobby and are around inspiring each other. And if you really like Lego, you should you should find a convention, because it is one of the coolest experience for a fan of Lego to be amidst all these creations that people have just built, off the cuff, and want to share with the world. It's really, really inspiring for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I appreciate about my art form and yours, and really anybody that has a hobby or an art form that they embrace, that sense of community, right? Where you find your people. I kind of was just the weird guy that played with dolls in the basement until I went to a puppetry conference, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, we speak the same language. We think about this stuff. And, that helps, when you can see yourself outside of yourself. So, I understand what you say about building in community with the Legos. I just wasn't sure if you had done it before the show, but that's cool that you had. It's a good feeling.
It is. I'm glad you've had that too. That's awesome.
Let's do one more of the youth here. Don't worry, you'll have another chance.
Did you purposely drive the Sunshine Wagon off the cliff?
I would almost love to say that I did, because that's the easy way out and a little less humiliating. But yes, that was a total accident, unfortunately, a complete driving failure. But as I already let you know earlier, I did drive here today. Thankfully, there are not a lot of cliffs in Mankato, so let's keep it that way.
So Caleb, I have a question for you, because I get this about my puppets. Are you precious about your pieces? Meaning, if you happen to drop a piece that you spend a lot of time on it, do you kind of go, oh no? Or are you of the attitude, I built it, I can build it again?
So there's two parts of this question. I believe with Lego, the destruction process is just as sacred as the building process. And each of these creations within a year will be dead, except the Sunshine Wagon. That I killed that one already.
It died once.
Yeah, we're good. And that of course is the magic of Lego, the build and rebuilding. Depends on the creation. I've only destroyed one creation that was really painful to take apart. One that hurt my soul, but the rest it's a joy. It's a joy. But I think especially the material itself is very important to me, and so I am quite careful to not just scratch it, get too much dust on it, and a lot of the adult community is obsessive in that way. I know some people who will only build with new pieces and will not buy used pieces on the internet. I will go for the cheap pieces, thank you very much. And I guess that's a good question about yours. What is the material process like? Because you have so many options at your disposal.
Yeah.
How do you go about determining what material to use for which puppet?
Early on, it was whatever was cheapest, because like you said, sometimes when you're building a Lego, you start snapping them together and they fail miserably. My workshop is full of foam skeletons that they're just laying around, and it's, I started to sculpt a head just to see if I could do it, and then once I knew I could do it, I didn't have a use for it, so throw it away. It's just sitting there, and sometimes I'll come back to it later on, but many times not. For most of these, the materials were just the materials that were given to me, and that was one of the fun things about the training process. You're told, make a penguin. So, okay, and you had a box of materials, that's what I made. I didn't choose purple for a monkey. That's what was given to me. I said, I'll make it purple. Now, some of the others I had some choices in. Like Eddie, I definitely had a choice in. This is Mongolian fur, alpaca fur, actually. And the others, I really was drawn to the blue. This guy's name is Bunky, and I made Bunky for a children's program that I was going to develop. He's Bunky, and he has a pink sister named Betty, so Bunky, and Betty. Oh. And they're monsters that live under the bed, and they're under the bed not so they can scare kids, but because they're scared of kids. But the deal is, they hide under the bed, and they listen to Bible stories that mom and dad read to the kids at night, and when the kids go away to school, they come out and rehash it and kind of try to live it out in their nonsensical monster brains. Well, Bunky got finished, I moved because I took a call, and then the project just stalled. And now I have a hard time coming back to it because it's 5 years later, I'm in a different stage of life. But the materials just, I chose some of them, some were just given to me, but underneath a lot of these creatures is, like I said, it's foam. And for many of them that I built on my dime, I used cheap foam called upholstery foam, 1845 upholstery foam. And then in the other ones that I build for clients or things that I've built that are going to go on TV, there's a foam called reticulated foam. And the difference is it has little holes in it. It's flexible, but when you build it together, it just has a stronger frame underneath. You can sew into it, and it lasts longer, and it's kind of the industry standard. It's like if you're painters, it's a difference between artist quality paint and student grade paint. It's a lot like that. And so I used the cheaper stuff when I was learning, and now when I build for clients, the materials make a difference, so I choose different materials. But to start it off, the question was about, am I precious or not? Even within the puppet community, you'll find a diversity there. I remember going to a training session with one lady who's a rock star puppeteer. Hopefully she doesn't mind me telling a story. I won't tell you who she is, but she would literally cradle her puppet around like a baby and walk it around, and because it was just such a precious thing to her. And then I grab mine and I just chuck it on the floor when I'm done on camera, and it's and my response was, "It's okay, I built it, I can rebuild it." And so that's kind of how I've looked at a lot of these. Maybe that's odd, but that's just how I kind of approach it.
If another man touches your puppets, are you upset?
No, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Have at it.
You brought up something interesting just now, and something that I think kind of struck. I heard it when you were being introduced that you're a master of puppetry and a Wells pastor.
Yes.
Which means Mequon's seminary instruction is really different than what we're doing at the ELS. But I mean, to me, it seems like those are two wildly different worlds to be occupying. Do you see crossover here? Like, what is the balance for your life? What are the dreams that are wrapped up in this?
Yeah, the long answer. I'll give you the long answer. Sorry.
Let's do long answer.
So I got into puppets because I was always the art kid, right? So the art kid is the kid that just, you're just into anything creative. And for a long time, it was drawing with crayons. It was not Legos, but it was drawing with crayons, comics books, just creating things. And even in high school, I liked to paint and draw. And it was, I don't know, I think I was 14 or 15, and my church was building a brand new church. And so I must have been 16, because I had driven to the Toma Public Library, and there was a book there called Of Muppets and Men. And I was looking for some art books, and I just happened to see it. I thought, okay. So I checked it out, and the church was having its grand opening. What do you call it? Groundbreaking. And it was the first time we were worshiping in it. So believe it or not, there were 3 services that day. 3, can you believe it? So being less sanctified, I think I can admit that. So you go to the first service, that's great. Second, third. By the third, I'm like, okay, all right, I'm 15. I got other things I want to do here. And the other thing, the kicker was, it was so full that I was actually out, not even in the narthex, I was in the library connected to the church behind it. So that's how far so I couldn't even see the pastor up front. So I have my book with me, so I'm going to look. So don't do that, kids, don't do that. So I look at it, but here's the thing. I saw a picture of Henson's workshop in New York, and there were these drawings, and then there were these sculptures that were the 3D version of the drawing. And I just got it. They could bring something from idea to 3D to real life. And that just blew my mind as something I wanted to do. So then I tried to make my own puppet, and I had no clue how to go about it. I went to Walmart and I bought green felt. Felt is one of the most, stiff and rigid fabrics. It stretches, but it won't come back. So I went and got felt and tried to make a puppet, and it was ugly. It was really ugly. And so I just kept with that process. I lost the question in all of that.
I'm wondering about, to use theological terms, which we won't stick with, really the connection between vocation and passion. I think right now we look out at this audience, and I think that there are a lot of young artists here. Yeah. And I think that there are a lot of aspiring artists here. And I think there are a lot of college artists here who have heard voices around them telling them that their pursuit of art is useless, and that this isn't something that has. You are as successful as a Lego master can be, right? You have reached the zenith of Lego-dom. And I would still imagine that, this is going to be a significant part of your life, but that it's not necessarily like going to be the sole thrust of your career. So I'm curious about this interplay where you've got these unusual, amazing, beautiful passions.
Thank you.
And also your work.
Yeah, thanks. That's where I was getting with that. Okay, so how did I come back to puppets as an adult then? I think where I really started to get into them was we started a mothers and little children ministry called Kids Bible Adventures at St. John's in Lannon. And it was a 0 to 5-year-old ministry. And at first there were 4 pastors serving 2 churches in this school. And so 2 churches connected to the school. And so each pastor took a week because every Friday in March and every Friday in October, we would do a devotion for these kids. And I saw, well, you know our training, children's messages are not something we're prompted on in our homiletics class. So I watched some guys who had never done this before flounder badly, and I myself flounder badly, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something that tries to catch the kids' attention. So the story that was assigned to me was King Josiah. I mean, 8-year-old boy king. How do you teach Josiah to kids that they're not going to fall asleep?
Can you kids say Die ganze Schrift treibt Christum?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a puppet. And it was a dog puppet named Ruff. He didn't make the cut, obviously. But I built Ruff, and I recorded a 2-way conversation between Ruff and I to teach kids about King Josiah. And it kind of worked. And for me then, I thought, okay, I've got an audience. So now I want to spend my time teaching them something worth hearing. And so then I told the other pastors, if you guys don't want to, I'll just do this. So they happily kind of said, you do it. So then I began developing characters to teach the themes and stories assigned for that particular session of Kids Bible Adventures. For example, Tad. Tad is a train conductor because during that session of Kids Bible Adventures, by the way, Tad's the guy in the train conductor hat there. He was designed because the session was about traveling and traveling from here to there. So one of the stories was Jesus coming to town, into Jerusalem on the back of the donkey, traveling. And so Tad got out his stick donkey with that donkey head on it and a stick, and he's riding around the screen. And it kind of caught the kids' attention. But that was a jumping point where I could then talk about Jesus riding on a donkey into Jerusalem. And so I found in ministry, the puppets really allowed me to communicate with younger children in a way that I had their attention so I could share something important with them. And not just children, but specifically kids with special needs really related to the screen, which I didn't know when I did it, but there was a lady, I won't use her name, but her son is autistic and severely where he's nonverbal, but he was glued to the screen. And she came and she said to me, who's making these videos? Where are you buying them? Can I have them so my son can do these for devotions? And that's where I got the idea of Bunky then, because I wanted to put him on the internet somehow. But so they were able to relate to the screen, relate to what I had to say. And so that's the first crossover in ministry was Kids Bible Adventures. And that's kind of what got me hooked on the idea of using puppets in my ministry.
Right on. And then Caleb, it's kind of I'd like to pose kind of the same question to you. Like I said, I mean, you have hit the highest aspirations of, well, anybody here who uses Legos. And besides that, you have had an epic year. Being on Lego Masters was not even the biggest thing to happen to you. This year you got married over the summertime, yes?
Is that your wife back there?
Hey. I'm also given to understand that Legos did not play a significant role in your marriage. Like you didn't get married under a Lego arch or anything like that, right?
No, it was definitely on the table, but I exercised some self-control there. But I think so many aspects of my life start with Lego, as strange as that might seem. So my wife and I were actually going through old photo albums, and there's a picture of me laying down at 1.5 years old in a pile of like the super-size version of Lego. It's called Quattro. It's massive, but like there's not been a lot of my life that hasn't had Lego in it. And Lego has spurred a lot of the decisions that I've made. For instance, I would not be at Bethany Lutheran College if I didn't play with Lego. So I was in 8th grade, and my brother and I fell in love with stop motion, which is very common for Lego because it works so perfectly. They lock into position so easily, and we had our iPod Touch 4 with that 240 pixel camera. It was awesome, but
He thinks that makes him sound old.
hey, none of the kids know what I'm talking about. But I could slot that thing into a scene and make movies. But what I loved most about that process was the editing process. And for all my life, everyone's like, you're going to be an architect, right? And so I felt, yeah, that's probably what I should do. And I was going to go to Iowa State University to enroll in their architecture program. But I kind of made a last-minute decision to give the media arts program here at Bethany a role because I loved editing Lego stop motion. And that was that. And it was my connection with Lego that actually led to my full-time job now as a Minecraft level designer. Because I think you can see the crossover there. I like building things. But it was a friend who I had met through Lego that introduced me to the game, a decade ago. And now I'm still playing and working for that very same game.
We could definitely geek out about stop motion animation because next on my agenda of things I want to do, I want to try to build a stop motion puppet. They're amazing.
Yes, stop motion is still my favorite form of media arts or anything I studied here. Yeah, you and Kurt Paulson would get along very well.
Well, that's fantastic. And it sounds to me like these are still passions that exist inside your lives. What would you say, maybe start with Caleb here, what would you say that it means to you to have this artistic pursuit that's a major component of your life, even if it's not exactly the thrust, where so many things start with Lego and then grow into something else?
I think this applies to most any hobby. Every time I've pursued Lego, something that I truly enjoy more than anything else, besides eating chocolate and ice cream, because those are the best, but I don't think much good comes out of that. But when I pursued Lego, I have found so much joy and fulfillment in the craziest of opportunities. And I would always encourage people just to do what you love. I think people forget to do that. Doing Lego has kept me young at heart, and it's opened up doors that I never saw coming. All because I decided to not sell all my Lego at my mom's garage sale when I was 14. Best decision I ever made.
So, I know this dates us. I've never seen the movie. Anybody seen Chariots of Fire? So, about 2 runners, right? One runner kind of feels like he has to run because he's got this scholarship, got to do it. The other runner runs because he loves it. And his family wants him to be something different. And finally, at the end of the movie, he says, listen, I do this because when I run, I feel God's favor. He feels God's pleasure. Right? So he just kind of says, God designed me to be a runner, and when I run, I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to. And honestly, for creative people, I think that's a part of it. That's just who God made us to be. Now, you mentioned I'm a pastor, and in my church body, I'm sure it's similar, we kind of have a mold for what a pastor does, right? And you press that down on a guy, and he fits it. You preach, teach, you minister sacraments, you serve the people, and I do that. I can do that. I can fill that mold. But then there's these parts of me that don't fit. They're the creative parts, the puppet-making parts. And that doesn't mean you can't be creative in ministry. You certainly can. But they're kind of outside our normal. And so when I first got into ministry, I just pressed down hard on that cookie cutter, and the parts of me that were creative, that were life-giving in a sense, were cut off, and that's not healthy. And it did not go anywhere good for me. And so eventually I had to come to terms with, you know what, if I'm going to be healthy, if I'm going to be who God made me to be and the best pastor I can be, this has to be part of my life. And God knew that when he called me into ministry, so he knows who I am. He knows what he's dealing with. So then the question is, how do I fulfill both calls? How do I be who God made me to be, and how do I be pastor? And that's not necessarily easy all the time.
I've got one more question for both of you, but before we get to that, I want to go back out to the audience. Let's say kids were still included here, and we'll open it up 20 and younger. But I know that you've been waiting very patiently, so go ahead and, so right up here front.
So what if you want to do these things, but you don't exactly have like the right materials or not like enough materials?
Why don't we start with Caleb for that one?
That's a great question. And I know better than anyone perhaps that there is a huge price threshold to overcome when buying something like Lego. But there
I see your wife sweating in the back there.
Yeah, she saw the budget for this month. It wasn't pretty. But I think this room gives such an amazing idea of what it means to be creative and how many different ways there are to be creative. It doesn't, there is no mold you have to fit to. There is no specified medium. I remember, before my brother and I had, a collection of 500,000 bricks, we built with stuff we found outside. There are so many ways to be creative and on a budget too. That doesn't lessen or cheapen what you're doing. And eventually, when you're older, you get a job, you can buy the expensive, fancy things. And that's fine too. But don't feel the need to limit yourself or what you can make. That's what being creative is. It's working within limits and overcoming those limits.
Yeah, that's what. Thank you. You just nailed it on that last part. I know sometimes as an artist, as a creator, we think if I only had the right color red, this painting would be awesome. Or if I only had the right size canvas, or if I just had the right fur, it would be great. But really, creativity is not being unlimited. Creativity is having a limit and then finding out what you can do, what you can make of those limits. So for example, you go back. Hello? Okay. So for example, you go back to the illustration of being a painter. I'm going to just use 3 colors. That's my palette. And I'm going to see what I can create with those 3 colors. I'm just going to use one pattern, a monkey. I'm going to see what I can come up with a monkey. I don't know if there's any fans of Jake Parker, the illustrator, on Instagram, Facebook, web everywhere. But Jake Parker does draw 100-somethings. And he took this thing he calls a little jelly bot. It's just a little rounded arm, almost like a Lego figure looking guy. And he did 100 of them, 100 different variations of a jelly bot, just to keep his brain creative. Because really, our creativity is when you put limits on things, and then you find out really what your creativity is. Otherwise, when I've been given carte blanche, do whatever you want, I almost freeze because it's too much. Wait. Hello?
This one works too now.
Doesn't matter.
It's a miracle.
Yeah.
I would also say, I gotta say, when you look at the Legos, you are using them in ways that they were probably not intended to be used when they were created. But you're breaking the rules that the creators came up with. There are bits poking out of there at angles they are not meant to poke out at. That's got to be the sort of thing that only gets born out of experimentation, having limited resources, and trying to find what works.
Yeah, and that's totally my experience. And that's the great thing, again, about being part of a community where you can learn some of these crazy things. And I could go on and on about what's legal and not legal as defined by the Lego group in Billund, but that doesn't matter. One of the joys of working within, again, a limited medium is finding ways to get outside that box. That's creativity.
Breaking Lego law.
And you mentioned about the Lego community, and I think I go back to the benefit of community. So I started to get into the puppetry really before the days of the internet. Like it was dial-up days. It was where the web was all text. And so you really had to know somebody that knew how to do this to figure out how to do it, right? And then I think kids, others who want to be creative nowadays, you have such a resource in YouTube. And if you just search how to build puppets, you can find guys, Adam Krutinger, Project Puppet on the internet, all these places that you go to their websites and they give their secrets away. You know, in the early days, it used to be like magic. Like, you had to know somebody who would give you the inside scoop, but the secrets were all guarded. Now it's just like, especially with the guy who taught me, Pasha Romanowski, Project Puppet. He just said his theme is, I give all my secrets away. And he does. He just makes it known because his goal is to advance the art form, not to make himself somehow the center of attention. He just wants to see awesome puppets.
Did we have another question? I think I saw. Okay, wonderful.
So, I was wondering, what is your favorite Muppet movie?
That's very good, by the way. That is very good.
Thank you.
Favorite Muppet movie? It's one that generally got panned. I really liked the second Muppet movie with Walter in it, Muppets Most Wanted.
Yeah.
With Kermit the
Constantine, I
Frog.
remember that. Yeah.
So, and Kermit, which one did you like the best to be in?
Well, you know, at the end of the movie, or...
No, just which movie did you like to be in the best?
Okay, I got you. Yeah, my favorite movie, definitely the original. You know, nothing can beat that, you know.
Yes,
It was
it's very
our first
good.
ever movie. I started out in the swamp and moved to Hollywood. You see.
That's awesome.
That's a story arc that you can't beat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
That is awesome.
What an amazing thing to be able to see people take something and give it a life. It's unbelievable. I saw another hand.
Did you build, by the way, did you build that by yourself?
I actually commissioned someone to make it for me.
Okay.
I had to shell out a couple of $100, but it was worth it.
Now, I have a quick question. I know that at Michigan State, puppetry is actually a major that you can pursue. Did you do any formal studying to get that good?
I actually haven't. I just did it on my own. I just did it on my own time. Kinda
That
like
seems
how
to be the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. Long time listener, first time caller. I wanted to ask you guys. I work with costumes a lot, and I had seen on your artist statement that you, Mr. Yahnke, do a lot of hand sewing for your puppets. Yeah. Caleb, I kind of know what your process is like, but what is
This is Caleb's wife, for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, this is my ex-boyfriend, Caleb. But I wanted to ask what your process was like in the building of what you make. Where do you start?
Yeah.
Where are the things that you end up twisting?
So everything starts with a sketch. I sketch out generally what it's going to look like by its shape, because puppetry has such a shape language to it. That's one thing that I tried to think about how to teach puppetry, and just by the shape of a puppet, you can give it a different character, right? There's all kinds of books you can read on shape design. But anyway, so I start out with a basic shape, and then I start to sketch out the character, and then once I complete that, the biggest thing with these type of puppets, the moving mouth puppets, is their head, right? Because you pay attention to the mouth. So then I go on, how am I going to construct this head to be most flexible, most useful? My goal is always to have a puppet that's for film. Okay, there's a difference between stage and film, but for film, I want it really to be as small as my hand. That's because then every little movement is articulated and translated onto the screen. So I design it, and then I go to a piece of foam, and I do a sculpt at half size. And so I start with razor blades and cut away what doesn't belong, and then I take a Dremel tool that has a little sanding paper disc that I make attached to it, and I just kind of finesse the foam and carve away until I have the shape that I want. Then I cut it in half. I cut it then into slices like peeling an apple, lay those pieces out, and that's my flat pattern. I take my flat pattern, blow it up 200%, glue it together, and then I have a working head that I can then make adjustments to. Once I have the head formed, I then start and do the same process with the body, with the hands, with all that stuff. Once the foam underskull is built, the understructure is built, I then drape it, which if you don't know what draping is, it's basically you take a fabric that's cheap, that's going to have the same properties as the fabric you'll finish in, and you lay it over the foam structure. So for fleece, which is like Tad and, well, Tad, the white guy there, he's fleece, and so it stretches. It has a one-way stretch. So I take cotton T-shirts that are old and yellowish, and it only has stretch one way, and I will cut them into pieces and lay them over it, pinch, make darts, so that way I have the skin. So then I take that off, lay it down, trace it out, that's my fabric pattern, and then I sew it together. And the reason why I hand stitch is twofold. First, I'm not good with a machine. And part of the reason I'm not good with the machine is because I have a cheap $80 Brother machine. And so when it sews, it bounces. And then also the guy who taught me really favored hand stitching. And once I learned how to be proficient at it, it's so much easier. There's so much control, and I can hide seams. I can put stitches on the top and hide them. So I really just hand stitch most of it. Maybe if I machine sew anything, it's when I'm in a hurry and I'll sew an arm and you just do one long seam. So that's generally what my process is. Once I complete the fur and foam, then I start adding features like the eyes, nose, that kind of stuff. And then one step I skipped, the inside, the mouth that you put your hand into, the mouth plate, that can be customized in a billion different ways. Some people prefer to have their thumb on the right side, it's right in the middle, on the left side. Some like to have their hands curled up. Some guys keep their pinkies up. In fact, if you talk with professional puppeteers and have them do their puppet on their hand like this, many will put their pinky up. And they do that not because they're fancy, but they do that because in so many puppets there's no brain, meaning there's no top of the head, so that pinky holds the head so it doesn't rock back on them. So they're just used to using bad puppets. So they put the pinky up. So you can customize the mouth plate, and I spend probably more time than I should just getting it so it feels right in there. But that's where the puppeteer spends most of his time. And so in the design process, I also have to decide, how do I want this puppet to move? And that impacts the materials that I use in the mouth, or the foam that I use, or the fleece that I use. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
We'll get to some more questions. Oh, wait, no, if we've got somebody waiting. Okay, yeah, we'll do one more question real quick here.
I have sort of a question about building sort of with Legos. When you make sort of a large shape, like, that you're not able to see into, like a large brick sort of thing, do you fill the whole thing with the bricks, or do you leave it hollow? And if you leave it hollow, how do you make sure it's stable and,
Yeah, structural stability is very important because these things are very heavy. I couldn't give you any measurement on any of these models in particular, but I once made an 80-pound build that I had to bring to Chicago, and that you have to plan for stuff like that. So Lego has developed a more engineering based system called the Technic system, which is completely compatible with the bricks you can see here in this room, but it incorporates pins and axles, and it's inherently more stronger because the bricks are made with more plastic and they're much harder to pry apart. So a lot of these larger buildings, the Septive Baylor is probably the best example, has a Technic skeleton on the inside to make sure that I can lift that whole building in one piece and feel reasonably confident about it. But the Technic system is great because it allows you to get a lot of the weird angles, but it's so strong. You have to punch the pins out with other Lego pieces to take it apart. So that's the best way to get that structural stability. And then that's the regular Lego system, which you see on the surface of all these builds, your regular 2x4 bricks, integrate seamlessly with that and can connect very strongly to that. So yes, stability is very important because all these builds are made to be shown at Lego conventions. That's like their ultimate goal. And I didn't even know it at the time, but they were made to be shown here tonight, and there's some travel involved. They have to survive my driving, which is, it's hit or miss.
Well, and you do use, I gotta say, you use negative space really well in your builds. The Gateway to the Sea that we've referenced a couple of times, you look at that and you can see hollowed out rooms behind it. So definitely you've incorporated the kind of hollow space that you asked about.
Yeah, one thing too, Lego is very strong. It's made with ABS plastic, which is a very high quality plastic. It is very hard to just physically damage a singular Lego brick. And so part of it is just not underestimating the strength of what a brick can hold.
Now, for a last question here, from me anyway, we'll turn it back to them in just a bit. We had a great question from the front row earlier here that I'd kind of like to revisit and just get thoughts from you. We've got a lot of people here with limited resources, some of them because they're children, some of them because they're college students, and some of us because we're living life, okay? If we're starting from just what we have on hand, do you have any simple advice for how to take our Lego build to the next level, or take our puppet build to the next level with just the things that we've got on hand? How do we make it one step more?
There's this great part of the Lego hobby called vignette building. And I have a few vignettes here. They're a little too big. But what a Lego vignette originally started as is an 8x8 stud base. And you can build whatever you want on it. But 8x8 studs is not a lot of bricks. And the idea was, how much can you pack into that tiny little space? Again, it's about having those limits and then doing something crazy with it. So those builds on the back wall are enlarged vignettes. They're a little more like 32 by 32 studs, cheating perhaps. But again, I set a limit for myself. I'm not gonna make this stretch across the room or anything like that. And so I think finding what you can do in a space restriction is really, really fun. And you can pop out a lot of those things really quickly too. Try a lot of different things. For anyone getting into Lego specifically, yeah, a little vignette is definitely the way to go. I guess one more thing on that too. I've seen this a lot on Instagram. Who doesn't love minifigures, right? And so, exactly, minifigures are the best. But they're called Minifigure Habitats, and it's the same 8x8 space, and you make just an environment for a specific minifigure. So find your favorite minifigure and create a little home for him in a tiny little space. And that's a great way to start exploring creativity, and having those restrictions in place. You got a good starting point.
Boy, for me, that's a tough question. I guess how I leveled up, you have technique, which you just work on your hand sewing, you just work on your sculpting with foam, you work on your gluing technique, all those things, just get good at them so that you can do them quickly and they're not sloppy, meaning like glue's not dripping all over, threads aren't hanging all out. So that would be just practice your craft. And then really if you're looking to build puppets for TV, like I mentioned earlier, just shrink the size. Like when I first started building, and I should have brought one of them along because they're hideous, but when I first started building, the heads were enormous. And it wasn't until I was trained on how to perform for camera that I suddenly realized this is not useful. So really the one advice would be shrink the size of the puppet, make it as small as possible to fit your hand, and then just have fun performing it. Because like you said at the beginning, this is an art form that needs you too. It's one thing to make the puppet, but it's another thing to do something with it. So just enjoy it. Have fun with it.
Fantastic. I think we have, Jason, do we have time for some more questions? One more question. Who's got it? I think we've got one in the third row here.
Caleb, what mini games do you actually create levels for Hypixel?
That's a great question.
So I am actually the lead designer for Skyblock right now, but I have actually worked on maps for every game mode we have on the network. So, except King of the Hill, which is no longer a game anyway.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy that we could do this tonight. What an epic show it is here. Feel free to stick around. Pieces, enjoy some treats, and one last time, let's give it up for our two masters, Puppet Master Dustin Yahnke, Lego Master Caleb Schilling.